This is the video on section 5.2. It's kind of a short section. It introduces just some marketing topics that are kind of important. In this Internet of Things, people are creating new devices and ways to incorporate them. So they just kind of go over a few terms that you should be familiar with. And the first two are a horizontal market and vertical markets. And a horizontal market is something that applies like no matter what the company is. So, for example, if you had an operating system or a server that you're setting up like Active Directory, well, that would be like something that would fit into a horizontal market because it doesn't really matter what you're doing. You need that kind of application. So in terms of something you might be designing, a security camera, well, that could be used in a hospital, it could be used in an office, it could be used at a house. Example of like horizontal markets. A vertical market is something that again is built specifically for a certain type of industry or a service that's being offered. So as examples they show there of some vertical ones, like in healthcare, well, keeping medical records is a lot different than keeping a record of songs you have in something like iTunes or something. So those are things that are made specifically to address the need of a specific market. In the study guide, why would you consider a horizontal industry? And when it says give some examples, there's some in the curriculum, but see if you can think of some things that might fit into there, as well as with a vertical industry. All right. So the other thing is when we come up with these some of these terms, they're referred to as integrated solutions. So it's where you look at when they talk about a holistic approach, the whole system and how it would fit into that particular market. So how it's going to affect each part of that industry. And in the industrial internet, we have the information internet, or the internet that we usually think of. Well, the industrial internet is something that is really kind of new, but it's using the internet in a different way. Not so much about data, but about how things in the world interact using the network. An example they talk about, is driverless cars. So the sensors like you might have in a new car that also tells you applies braking or keeps you in a lane. Those are all kind of things that are not traditional internet things. So this new term of an industrial internet. And really, those are the main concepts in this, this particular chapter. Is just kind of distinguishing between horizontal, vertical, what we mean by an integrated solution, and how, sensors. It might be more than one sensor that's going to connect. So, you might have a sensor that is looking at the temperature, another one looking at humidity. That might affect how much water you're going to put in a field for a farmer or something. But how it's more than just one simple sensor. Anytime you talk about integration, you're talking about blending in different kinds of things, and then how all these lead to a different look on what the internet is. So when you're thinking of these things, and trying to come up with business models and things, you if you're creating them, have to figure out how these are all going to interact and how the stuff in a business model, how you have to, what you plan on doing, and how the decisions you make are going to affect other parts of your business model. So in here they talk about these 9 different building blocks that we used to have a lab that we kind of went over how to set up a business plan. They don't really talk that much about it anymore in the curriculum per se. I wish they did. It was kind of interesting. But that's kind of stuff that you can kind of learn in marketing. The rest of the chapter in section 5.3 is really just a bunch of different examples of how Cisco has incorporated some of these concepts into the vertical markets and how they're being used as integrated solutions, and how all these things that we just talked about kind of fit in. So there's a lot of good videos in this section, and I'm not necessarily going to go through each and every one, but in the study guide, these questions here that you kind of answer will help you go through those videos and kind of pick out some of the key points. But it's really just some examples of all this stuff. And they do one about the healthcare, which is kind of important today. They do one about the smart cities, which again is all here in the study guide, and how it has helps us be more efficient in our resources. And that is whether it's talking about finding a way to park a car, or whether what areas of the city need more electrical power at certain times of the day. So that's sort of the second one, and then the last one kind of leads in what I was talking about, like the grids. How does all this stuff help us to be more efficient in the way we use power, because power comes from fossil fuels right now, and other ways. But for example, if you were going to integrate in some wind power or some solar power, and when you switch over, how much is being delivered here? If there is no wind, when you switch over to something else, all of those things are part of the smart grid. And the videos that are in there are all again really interesting. I encourage you to watch them. And then lastly is in manufacturing. A big area, and when we talk about all these things are kind of like industrial internet type things, whether we're talking about the healthcare or the power grid. But it is helping us take all this stuff into account. So think about some of the shortages that are going on now, and when factories are working and supply chains have to be done. Well, all these things have to interact with each other, and what is the inventory here? What do we have to make more of today? How do we switch over machines? So all that stuff can get pretty costly and complex, but if you have a way of analyzing it all, it's going to be more efficient. So that's sort of the other sections in the chapter. This is kind of just like an informational chapter. There are a couple of neat packet tracers that go with it. Again, I think they're kind of cool. They're the kind of packet tracers that we don't necessarily set up, but they're pretty involved and have a lot of good features in them, and you can kind of play around with and see how all this stuff kind of interacts with each other. So that's chapter 5 and the second part of it, and I hope some of this explanation helps a little bit in terms of setting all this up. So the 6 pillars: connectivity, network, fog, computing, security, data analysts, management and automation, and the application enablement platform. These are all things that were in section 5.1. The vertical and horizontal markets, is a term we need to be familiar with, and how they connect into these different areas. What is horizontal that's being used there? What is vertical? And then the healthcare, the smart cities, the smart grid, and manufacturing. And each one of these is something different. I mean, the healthcare maybe a little bit more traditional in terms of like data and but not only collecting information about patients, but also bringing that the doctors remotely, like we do so many things these last few weeks, to people that can't get to the physical place. And then the cities, how do we make our cities safer? How do we make them more secure? How do we offer Wi-Fi to everybody? And then of course energy, smart grid. Most people don't really understand, but the grid is sort of a network in itself. So a lot of our network concepts can also be applied, in the grid, where we're routing power, where we need to use power, and how we protect our power. And then lastly, in manufacturing. So the sensors that are not only in the factories that make the stuff, but also in the supply chain. So the factory that's making all that toilet paper out there needs to know, well, maybe we don't need to make 5 different kinds of toilet paper right now. We need to make one basic kind, and what is that going to change in our factory setups, and how can I, so I can quickly do that if I have everything connected with, my factory operations. And then, all right, where along the line in the supply chain do I need to start sending this? Where do I start to need routing it? Where is the biggest, need? Well, that wraps up this video, and I will talk to you later.